Right. Hey, everyone, welcome back. We're going to get into something pretty intense today. We're doing a deep dive into uh, all the stuff surrounding Joe Rogan and his take on the Russia-Ukraine war.
Yeah, there's been a lot of back and forth and
Yeah, and to be honest, it's a little tricky to wade into. Um,
yeah.
but I think it's really important
No,
because,
absolutely.
I mean,
Well,
Joe Rogan's got such a huge platform. It's like so many people listen to his podcast.
millions.
When he says something, it really has an impact. So when he starts talking about the war in Ukraine and Zelenskyy and the U.S. getting involved,
That's when it gets interesting, to say the
it
least.
gets people talking. And, it
Yeah,
raises a lot of questions.
yeah, it gets pretty heated
Yeah.
for sure.
So that's what we're going to do in this deep dive. We're going to unpack what Rogan actually said. We're going to look at the reaction, especially from Wladimir Klitschko, who's been pretty vocal about this whole thing.
Oh yeah, he didn't hold back at all.
No, he did not. And then we're going to sort of zoom out and look at how this all fits into the bigger picture of wartime propaganda. I think you might be surprised by some of this stuff. It's a real eye-opener.
Yeah.
So let's jump right in, all right? What did Rogan actually say on his podcast that got everyone so fired up?
Well, one of the biggest things was his stance on the U.S. giving Ukraine those long-range missiles, the ones that can, hit targets inside Russia. He was really worried about that, saying it could escalate the conflict,
Yeah.
maybe even trigger World War III.
Yeah, he was painting a pretty scary scenario.
He was. And then he went on to criticize President Biden, saying that the decision to send those missiles was all politically motivated, basically implying that Biden's more focused on getting reelected than actually helping Ukraine.
Wow.
Yeah, it's a pretty bold claim.
It is. So Rogan's saying that Biden's not really concerned about Ukraine. He's just trying to boost his chances of staying in the White House.
That's what he seemed to be suggesting, yeah.
Hmm. And did he stop there?
Oh, not even close. He also went after Zelenskyy, pretty harshly, actually. He said that Zelensky's behavior was cocaine-like and implied that he's, fueled by drugs.
Basically.
Yeah, and he even called those who are confident in the face of Russia's nuclear threats monkeys. And he specifically targeted Zelenskyy and his supporters with that comment.
Wow. Those are some pretty strong words.
They are, and they really tap into this narrative that's been floating around, the idea that Zelenskyy is unstable, unreliable, and whether it's intentional or not, that kind of rhetoric aligns with some common tactics used in, Russian propaganda.
Wait, hold on. Are you saying Joe Rogan is pushing Russian propaganda?
Well, that's a tough question, isn't it? I mean, propaganda doesn't always have to be deliberate. Sometimes just repeating certain narratives, regardless of your intent, can have the same effect as, intentionally spreading propaganda.
So even if Rogan doesn't realize it, what he's saying could be helping to spread these harmful ideas.
Exactly. And that's where Klitschko comes in with his response. And let me tell you, he was not happy.
Yeah, I saw some of his tweets. He definitely didn't hold back.
No, he did not. He straight up accused Rogan of repeating Russian propaganda and said that this kind of talk actually weakens democracies. And get this, he challenged Rogan to a debate on his own podcast.
Whoa, that's a bold move going right into the lion's den.
Right. It really shows how committed he is to, setting the record straight and pushing back against these narratives he sees as dangerous.
It's pretty incredible. We've got Joe Rogan, this mega influencer, saying things that, whether he means to or not, sound a lot like Russian propaganda. And then you've got Wladimir Klitschko, a Ukrainian icon, calling him out and saying, let's talk about this publicly.
It's like a microcosm of the whole information war that's happening alongside the actual fighting in Ukraine.
What strikes me the most is Klitschko's courage. He could have just ignored Rogan or dismissed him, but he chose to engage, to challenge him, to fight back against those harmful ideas. It's like he's saying, we can't let fear silence us.
And I think it's really smart, strategically. He's not just reacting emotionally. He's choosing to engage with Rogan on his own platform, in front of his own audience. It's risky, but it could also be a brilliant way to reach a whole new group of people.
So we're seeing this play out on two levels, the actual war in Ukraine, and then this parallel information war happening in the media and online.
Exactly. And it's getting harder and harder to separate the two.
It's like this tangled web where reality and perception are constantly feeding into each other.
And that's why it's so crucial to be critical thinkers, Question your sources, consider different perspectives, and be aware of the potential for manipulation.
Because the truth is out there somewhere, but it's up to us to find it.
Couldn't have said it better myself.
And that's what we're trying to do here. Dig deeper, explore the nuances, and hopefully help you navigate this crazy information landscape.
That's the goal.
There's a lot more to unpack here, so stick with us.
We're just getting started. This whole thing with Rogan and Klitschko, it really makes you think about how tricky it can be to separate strong opinions from actual propaganda, especially when you're talking about something as intense as war,
Yeah, totally. And then when you throw in people's political leanings, it gets even more complicated.
Oh, absolutely.
Like Rogan's been pretty open about believing that things would be different if Trump was still in charge.
Right. And he's even said he thinks the Trump administration would de-escalated the conflict.
And he had Trump on his podcast, like right before the last election. It's interesting how our political views can really shape how we see things, especially something like this war.
It's natural to kind of gravitate towards information that confirms what we already believe, but that also makes us more vulnerable to, being manipulated, especially when it comes to propaganda.
So how do we, as listeners, how do we avoid falling into that trap? How do we get better at spotting the difference between someone's genuine opinion and something that's designed to mislead us?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it?
It is.
It takes a real conscious effort to become a critical thinker, to really question what you're seeing and hearing, and to, look for different perspectives.
It's like we need to build up those mental muscles for dealing with all the information that's thrown at us these days.
Exactly. And there's some practical things we can do to strengthen those muscles. Like, first and foremost, always check your sources. Where is this information coming from? Is it a reputable news outlet, an expert in the field, or someone with a clear agenda?
So basically, don't just take things at face value. Dig a little deeper, do your own research, see if those claims hold up.
Exactly. And be wary of anything that's super heavy on the emotional appeals,
Yeah.
like fear-mongering, that kind of thing. Propaganda often tries to trigger strong emotions rather than presenting a balanced argument.
So it's about recognizing those tactics that are trying to, bypass our logic and go straight for our gut reactions.
Right, exactly. And knowing some common propaganda techniques can be really helpful here, like cherry-picking data, using misleading headlines, creating false dichotomies. Those are all classic propaganda tools.
It's like having a mental toolkit for spotting those red flags and approaching things with a healthy dose of skepticism.
Yeah, absolutely. And another crucial tool in that toolkit is seeking out diverse perspectives. Don't just stick to sources that reinforce what you already believe.
Challenge yourself.
Challenge yourself, yeah.
That saying, you are the average of the 5 people you spend the most time with. Well, in this case, it's about diversifying your information diet.
I like that. Diversifying your information diet. I like that.
Exposing yourself to different sources, to get a more well-rounded understanding.
That's a great analogy. And remember, it's okay to change your mind as you learn more. Critical thinking isn't about being right all the time. It's about constantly evaluating and updating your beliefs based on new information.
It's about embracing that learning process and recognizing that, we're never really done learning.
Exactly. So, in essence, it's about being an active participant in how you consume information, not just passively absorbing whatever comes your way. It takes effort, but it's so important, especially in times like these, with all the conflict and uncertainty surrounding the war.
It's almost like we need to become information detectives, carefully examining the evidence and piecing together the truth.
I love that, information detectives. That's perfect. And this whole Rogan-Klitschko thing really underscores the responsibility that comes with having a big platform. Rogan, with his millions of listeners, he has the power to shape opinions and really influence how people view this war.
His words carry weight, whether he intends them to or not.
Exactly, and it's a reminder that we all play a part in fighting misinformation and promoting responsible dialogue. But what really impressed me was Klitschko's willingness to engage with Rogan directly. He could have just ignored him or dismissed him, but instead, he challenged him to a conversation.
It takes guts to do that, especially knowing that millions of people will be listening.
It does, and I think it speaks to Klitschko's faith in the power of dialogue, even in the midst of conflict. It's a reminder that even when we disagree strongly, there's still room for reasoned debate and trying to find common ground.
It's about recognizing that we might not always see eye to eye, but we can still have respectful conversations, where different viewpoints can be heard and considered.
That willingness to listen and learn from each other is so important.
It's crucial.
It's about creating a culture of critical thinking and honesty, where we're willing to question our own assumptions and be open to learning from others, even when it's challenging.
So where do we go from here? We've talked about the power of propaganda, the importance of critical thinking, and the responsibility that comes with a platform like Rogan's. What's the key takeaway for our listeners? What should they be thinking about as they continue to explore this whole issue?
I think the main takeaway is that we all have a duty to be careful about the information we consume, especially during times of conflict and uncertainty. We can't just blindly accept everything we hear or read. It's crucial to question our sources, consider different perspectives, and be aware of the potential for manipulation.
It's like we all need to develop that inner voice that asks, is this really true? What are the motivations behind this information? Who benefits from this narrative?
Exactly. And along with that skepticism, we also need to be willing to engage in respectful dialogue, even when we disagree. Klitschko's willingness to challenge Rogan is a great example of that. Open conversation can be so powerful for understanding and sometimes even for finding some common ground.
It's about recognizing that we're all part of this larger conversation, and our voices, even if they don't reach millions of people, still matter.
They absolutely do, and we have a responsibility to use them thoughtfully and ethically, especially when the stakes are so high, like with this war.
Well said. So, as we wrap up this part of our deep dive, let's leave our listeners with a final thought to ponder.
This whole exchange between Rogan and Klitschko brings up a fundamental question that we all face in this digital age. Whose voices get amplified and whose get silenced? And how do we make sure we're not accidentally spreading harmful narratives? It's a question that challenges us to be more critical, more informed, and more engaged with how we consume and share information. And at the end of the day, it's a question we each have to answer for ourselves.
Yeah, it's so easy to just surround yourself with people who think the same way.
Oh, totally. It's like we all have our own little echo chambers.
But that's when we need to be the most careful, to really make an effort to seek out different viewpoints.
To challenge our own biases.
Exactly, and it's not always comfortable.
No, it's not.
But it's how we grow. And it all kind of brings us back to the role of the media, right? How they shape what people think, especially during a conflict like this.
And what's fascinating is that Rogan himself has actually predicted that the conflict will de-escalate if there's a change in leadership in the U.S.
He has.
Yeah, he's on record endorsing Trump and even had him on the podcast.
Wow.
Yeah. And Zelenskyy has also expressed hope for a faster resolution if there were a change in U.S. leadership.
It's like politics and the war narrative are completely intertwined.
It's a complex situation, that's for sure.
So how do we make sure we're not contributing to the problem? How do we avoid spreading harmful narratives?
Well, we need to be skeptical, especially when it comes to sources that have a clear agenda.
Like, be your own fact checker.
Exactly. And don't be afraid to talk to people who disagree with you. You might not change their mind and they might not change yours, but the act of listening and trying to understand those different perspectives, that's valuable.
It's about creating space for those difficult conversations, acknowledging the complexity without oversimplifying.
And at the end of the day, it's about recognizing that we're all in this together. We have a shared responsibility to promote truth, accuracy, and understanding.
This deep dive has been, it's been a lot.
It has.
We've covered the power of words, the importance of critical thinking, and how hard it is to navigate the world of information these days.
We've just scratched the surface, but hopefully this gives you some tools and perspectives to continue your own exploration of this complex topic.
To our listeners, keep digging, keep questioning, and keep engaging in these crucial conversations. It's through thoughtful dialogue that we can make sense of this ever-changing world.
Couldn't agree more.
And as always, thanks for joining us on The Deep Dive.